Greetings, folks. This is Ronwise Gamgee, and welcome to Quick and Dirty Roleplaying. In this video, I'll talk about the aspects of a character's behavior that I think should not be under complete control of the player. Viewer, ask yourself this. Are you in complete control of yourself? Do you deliberately decide exactly how you behave during each and every situation in your life? Or do you find yourself reacting to these things instinctively, either as a result of your personality or as some sort of survival instinct or coping mechanism? If you answered yes to the first question and assert that you never find yourself behaving in a reactive manner, then I say you're full of it. If, on the other hand, you're honest and answered no, and you do find yourself behaving in a reactive manner in certain situations, welcome to humanity. Here's the follow-up. If you are not in complete control of every single action that you take and find yourself instinctively or habitually reacting to certain situations due to your personality or survival instinct, why would you roleplay your character as someone who does? Why would a level 1 character behave unflappably in the presence of some monstrous creature, or act as if it were just another Tuesday if they come across a pile of dead bodies? Stuff like that should have an emotional impact on your character, because that would certainly have an emotional impact on you, unless you've become hardened due to those circumstances due to real life experience and proper psychological processing. There's a number of tabletop role-playing games that deal with these types of issues, oftentimes due to the theme of the setting, such as pretty much all of Onyx Path's, formerly White Wolf's, tabletop role-playing game product lines, as well as Call of Cthulhu and Unknown Armies, which I find to be excellent with regards to those mechanics. GURPS even has ways of dealing with this through psychological disadvantages that have a self-control number, a score that you have to roll equal to or less than, or else succumb to the psychological issue that was triggered. That self-control roll is distinct from the will roll, which I find to be pretty genius. One thing that I find helpful with this topic of how characters and people react to things is through this chart called the emotion wheel, which is a pie chart that's composed of multiple rings, with the innermost rings listing more generalized emotions and the outer rings subdividing into specific emotions. I'm confident that the average person's emotional vocabulary, especially the average American's, is very limited, even more so for men and boys, since cultural conditioning of men and boys typically disincentivizes them to acknowledge emotions other than anger. Anyways, pull up the emotional wheel chart on the link that I've left in the description and examine emotion wheel number 2 specifically, because that evenly divides comfortable and uncomfortable emotions. While you may have come across every word describing an emotion listed here throughout your life, and notice their placement in the chart and under which emotion they fall under. For example, we very often use the word interested or interesting, which I find to be one of the most boring and nondescript words in the English language. Underneath interested, however, are more specific forms of being interested, such as attracted, curious, inspired, and creative. That adds depth to people, and characters are people, even when they're not technically human beings in the game world. If you're not taking this into account in-game, you're not role-playing a character, you're moving a game piece. Heck, even if you're just waiting for your character to kick some ass, describe them as bored, which leads me to the next part, personality. One of my favorite psychological models for describing someone's personality is the 5-factor model, or the Big Five. The acronym for this model is OCEAN. O stands for openness to experience. C stands for conscientiousness. E stands for extroversion. A stands for agreeableness, and N stands for neuroticism. Now, each of these can be broken down into two subcategories. Openness to experience can be split between openness to artistic expression and intellect, which is different from intelligence. Conscientiousness can be split between orderliness and due diligence, basically like how hardworking you are. Extroversion is split between enthusiasm and engagement with others. Agreeableness is split between compassion and politeness. And finally, neuroticism is split between volatility and withdrawal. Now, each of these subcategories can be placed on a scale of 0 to 100, with 50 indicating a balance between the extremes. Now, as tempted as I am to go into more detail regarding the 5-factor model, I'll leave that up to you, the viewer, to look further into it, because I want to get to the point of the video in a reasonably timely manner. The last thing I will say about it is that how a person is scored on each factor of the Big Five remains relatively stable throughout most of their life and are significantly influenced by their genes and their environment. So with that being said, if you're a player that wants to roleplay a character that is distinct from yourself and is not simply a self-insert into an imaginary world, using the 5-factor personality model can serve as a very effective guide in that regard, much better than alignment, in my opinion. While the previously mentioned games use game mechanics to not only accentuate the game's themes, but to limit or force behaviors and conditions during certain circumstances, in actuality, many of the circumstances presented in those games are things that can also occur in the fantasy or sci-fi heartbreakers that we most likely play in. Let's take Unknown Armies shock gauges, for example. In Unknown Armies, each character has 5 shock gauges, which are basically ways of taking emotional damage. They are helplessness, isolation, self, unnatural, and violence. When confronted with a situation that sufficiently attacks one or more of these gauges, the character can either successfully deal with it or not through a reactive dice roll. When they fail their dice roll, the game's mechanics reflect what ought to happen to the character in the narrative, as well as leaving a lasting mechanical effect. When they succeed at their dice roll, however, they become more hardened and gain an immunity to emotional attacks of a certain threshold, though becoming hardened also comes with its own drawbacks, mainly with being less capable of connecting with others, which imposes penalties on certain social dice rolls. These game mechanics aim to reflect the thesis that I presented at the start of the video. The character is not in complete control of their every behavior because they're human, and therefore, the player should not be in complete control of the character's every behavior because the character is human. If you're a GM and you would like to inject some more humanity into your players' characters, talk about the subject matter with your group and try applying these principles into your game for at least one session. Call for will saves or whatever equivalent whenever the player or whenever the PC comes face to face with some serious shit, however that's defined in your setting, and have the player roleplay the outcome of the dice roll. If this is something that you and your group come to appreciate afterwards, try working out some house rules by adapting mechanics from other games onto your own, or if you want to go the less intense route, incorporate GURPS's self-control mechanics of rolling dice against a static number and without incorporating the PC's willpower stat due to the nature of the compulsive behavior that the PC is dealing with. If you like or dislike anything you've seen in this video, please give it a like or a dislike and leave a comment. Subscribe if you want to support my channel, and if you really want to support my endeavors, head over to my Patreon and become an appreciated trooper. The link is in the description. Until then, folks, take care and play to find out what happens.